Welcome, good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, good evening, wherever you are. Welcome to this session. As per previous sessions, please do use the chat box to go ahead and introduce yourself. Make sure to click that blue drop-down menu, select all panelists and attendees if you want everyone to see your message. And you can also, if you have any questions for the speakers, go ahead and submit them in the Q&A so our moderator can read them. Finally, this session is being recorded and all recordings for all the sessions from today and yesterday will be available after the end of the event. I'll now hand over to Stephen, our moderator, to take it away.
Hi there. Welcome back, everyone. For our final presentation, Ben Schelke of the Ocean Foundation will be introducing Blue Forest restoration methodology for coastal ecosystems in the Caribbean. Now, restoration is a key component of the Blue Forest project. It's been critical in the community-based mangrove carbon finance projects we have helped develop in Kenya and Madagascar. When restoration occurs in these communities, it's a community effort, and lots of the communities show out to help plant these mangroves for future generations. Restoration is also one of the tools we explore in the Blue Forest Solutions website that we've just launched in early access today, and the link to that will be shared in the chat. So with that, I am pleased to welcome Ben Schelke, Program Officer with the Ocean Foundation, and he manages their Blue Resilience Initiative, Fiscal Sponsorship Program, and other international programs related to protected areas, high seas governance, and sustainable tourism. Take it away, Ben.
All right, thank you, Stephen, so much, and thank you for everyone who put together this event. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to session 2. My name is Ben Schelke, a program officer at the Ocean Foundation, where, as Stephen mentioned, I manage our Blue Resilience Initiative, which is focused on nature-based solutions for climate change mitigation and adaptation. The Ocean Foundation has served as a collaborator in the Jeff Blue Forest project, including a significant amount of co-financing. In addition to the project, I'm going to
interrupt if you don't mind putting it in presentation mode.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, sorry about that. So yeah, in addition to the project I'm going to talk about today and this site prioritization methodology, we've also supported habitat restoration efforts in Puerto Rico, in Fiji, in California, and other US states. So first, to kind of set some context here, the region we were kind of assigned to study and explore is the CLME+Region, the Caribbean Large Marine Ecosystem, which is part of a Jeff project implemented by UNDP and co-financed, of course, by Jeff. And basically all these different countries in this two really large ecosystem regions are kind of coming together to develop action plans for habitat restoration as we look forward to the decade of restoration. This region is bordered by over 35 states and consists of an area of over 4 million square kilometers. Lots of blue carbon restoration and conservation opportunities exist in this region. The purpose of this kind of project is in relationship to a consultancy with the Caribbean Environment Program under UNEP. And essentially TOF, the Ocean Foundation, was contracted by UNEP to prepare a report on large scale habitat restoration and pollution reduction project, prioritization, essentially site prioritization, as well as needs and opportunities for investment in this region. As part of the consultancy, we assembled a team of experts in seagrasses, mangroves, coral reefs, pollution reduction, ecosystem valuation, and blended finance. The report, as you can see, the cover is on the right hand side of the screen here. As part of this process, we engaged a lot of local, regional, and national stakeholders in a participatory process to gather their input and feedback as we developed this methodology and kind of explored a few case studies and investment plans. And really, this report was designed to build upon previous reports from the SPA subprogram of the Cartagena Convention, Secretariat, and the CLME+ project, including the state of nearshore marine habitats in the wider Caribbean, the regional strategy and action plan for the valuation, protection, and restoration of key marine habitats in the wider Caribbean, as well as the state of Cartagena Convention area report. an assessment on marine pollution from land-based sources and activities in the wider Caribbean region. So this report was really supposed to build on some previous work done by the program. The report itself consists of 2 different parts. The focus of the presentation today is on the scorecard that we developed. It's a site prioritization scorecard for large-scale ecosystem restoration and pollution reduction. In part 1, we kind of start the report talking about the current state of key coastal habitats, including seagrasses, mangroves, and coral reefs, as well as some of the negative effects of pollution in the region, from fertilizers, herbicides, pesticides, sewage, wastewater, toxic waste, and sediments. As I mentioned, we developed a scorecard system that allows local, regional, national, and even kind of international stakeholders to prioritize large-scale habitat restoration projects based on 3 indicators of need, alongside 5 indicators of feasibility, really looking for a balance between need and feasibility as we do kind of a pre-feasibility assessment, if you will, of the opportunities that exist. Throughout the report, one of the common themes is this idea of approaching restoration in a seascape manner, looking at how all of these different habitats are connected to one another, synergistic, right? And in order to really affect large-scale change and impact, we need to think about these things as collective ecosystems, as holistic systems, right? And really prioritize projects that combine different elements, not just focusing on mangrove restoration, for instance, but looking at seagrasses, coral reefs, and I think even most importantly, looking at ways to minimize some of the factors that lead to degradation of coastal ecosystems, specifically runoff from agriculture, wastewater, untreated wastewater in many places in this region, which really have a severe impact on these coastal ecosystems. In part 2, we look at kind of ecosystem valuation, the state of the sector, if you will, and kind of develop blended finance models to start to approach some of these large-scale habitat restoration sites. And through this scorecard system, we developed 3 different case studies to kind of illustrate different elements that could be included based on the kind of, the environment that exists, the socioeconomic conditions, governance, all of these different factors, just to show how different strategies apply to different places. And here's kind of the scorecard. Note that we are in the process of designing a more user-friendly version of the scorecard that will have great graphic design, be easy to fill out. This was kind of the scorecard, the rough scorecard we developed as part of the report. But basically it starts with kind of step 1, which is kind of looking at country restoration potential. And this is really going to depend on kind of what you're looking at, the different types of studies that have already been created, the literature that, if you will, that exists to kind of inform this scoring system. Now, before I go into the other steps, I want to emphasize that this is more of a framework than anything. It's not an absolute kind of mechanism to say this site is worth restoration and this site is not. Rather, it's a tool to be used by a variety of different stakeholders with specific local knowledge to just kind of conduct, as I've said, a pre-feasibility assessment. Because the reality is, to do any type of real kind of restoration work, you need to do an on-the-ground feasibility assessment, and that can take years. But this is a step that kind of informs where do you go next, right? Especially as you're pursuing larger kind of development funding. So basically, we start at the country level and we look at the level of need and feasibility potential, and we look at these different aspects. And ideally, you have a lot of different stakeholders filling out this card and all kind of having a conversation, if you will, about their scoring. It's subjective ultimately, but it should be based off of local expert knowledge. Through this initial step, we isolated several different countries that we were focusing on. Now, this isn't every country in the CLME+Region, but these are countries that our experts that we work with, our consultants, had intimate knowledge of. So it really allowed us to give more accurate scores. But I think a broader kind of assessment would require more actors than were possible during the consultancy. But see, here are some of the countries that we really identified as key places that we could pursue kind of habitat restoration and pollution reduction projects in the region. Then you start to look at the specific sites within those countries. Now, we all know there are many, many sites within all of the countries in this region that have restoration potential. But what we assigned our experts and partners and local stakeholders to do is really identify 3 sites in each country in which they have some form of knowledge or expertise or background in order to kind of fill out a more detailed scorecard. And what we're doing here is we're comparing different sites based off of a lot of different criteria. We have ecological criteria, we have socioeconomic and ecosystem services, feasibility, and drivers of change and threats. These all are supposed to be factored in as the expert, as the stakeholder is filling out the scorecard. And then once we have these kind of more detailed scorecards as part of step 2, we do a SWOT analysis. So we look at the different sites in a different light and think about, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, and how that should weigh on our scoring and how that should weigh on the prioritization of the ultimate site that we select to pursue investment for. And then in the final stage, step 4, we're taking that highest priority site and developing kind of a unique scorecard for that site specifically with some additional details and comments and background and context that's needed to really kind of paint a holistic picture of where we want to do restoration work. As I mentioned before, we had a limited number of experts working on this. They had partners on the ground that were being engaged, but due to the short-term nature of this consultancy, we weren't able to do every country in the region or every site for that matter. But from the work that we did and the scorecards we developed, we have a very not a very nice colored version table of this. Once again, preparing some additional follow-up documentation that will be easier to digest and read. But essentially, we looked at all of these different sites, which, by the way, if you're looking for different sites in these countries and you happen to be a stakeholder or restoration practitioner, these are great sites to look at. But through this process, we scored all these different sites in these different countries and really tried to kind of hone in on the ones that we wanted to develop case studies for as part of the actual investment plan. I'm sure many of you are familiar with many of these sites, which some restoration and conservation work has taken place in many of these places, but I think what our experts believe is that there's a lot of opportunity in the future to kind of pursue even larger projects, especially as countries are trying to meet their nationally determined contributions under the Paris Agreement. Here's a map, a little bit easier to look at, listing all of the sites that we did spatially and kind of showing, based on color, their potential. And once again, some experts on this call and others may disagree with some of the scoring that we did. That's great. The whole point of this is to kind of to initiate a discussion and to look at some of the factors that are really going to have an impact as you pursue large-scale habitat restoration. As I mentioned previously, this kind of work really advances the Blue Resilience Initiative with the Ocean Foundation, in which we're not only supporting research on the environmental, economic, social, and aesthetic benefits of blue carbon ecosystems, but really looking at ways to expand mechanisms for market-based and philanthropic financing. As part of our work, we coordinate training workshops, learning activities. This kind of engagement allows us to conduct, to create scorecards like this and engage with experts that we've worked with in the past and plan to work in the future on habitat restoration. And we are actually pursuing projects under the umbrella of this program. And many of the sites that I just showed you a moment ago that we've been prioritizing are key areas of investment that we are looking to support in the future. And another element of this that I didn't mention, not directly related to habitat restoration, is we're increasingly looking at solutions for things like seaweed, right? For sargassum, which has become a huge plague and a nuisance in the Caribbean, probably mostly likely due to increased amounts of nutrients going in the water and warmer sea surface temperatures. So I think all of these elements blend together to really help communities position themselves to face the challenges of climate change and really take full advantage of the coastal resources, the blue carbon resources that exist along their coasts. It's really been a pleasure and an honor to work with Blue Forest on this project. I'm looking forward to pursuing a lot more large-scale habitat restoration in the future, perhaps with some of the folks on this call today. So thank you. Open to questions or comments. Let me know what you think. And of course, I can provide this report if you'd like to follow up afterwards, and you can read it, learn about some of the conclusions and findings in greater detail. So thank you.
Thank you for a great presentation, Ben. I have a couple questions that came up. Under the restoration scorecard, how does what type of ecosystem benefits or what goes into the ecosystem valuation criteria? Specifically, of course, I'm going to ask this. Does blue carbon go into that, or an idea of blue carbon, or is that maybe preliminary days yet?
Yeah, I think when the experts are filling out this scorecard, they're taking advantage of a lot of different resources that exist, including regional and national assessments. Blue carbon is something that we factored in, in kind of assigning these scores in this preliminary scoring process. Blue carbon is talked about extensively in part 2, in which we talk about investment strategies. Now, we all know, there are a lot of challenges associated with blue carbon and certification. The cost is incredible, and the level of knowledge and detail needed to really verify these things is immense. I think we're kind of at a change, kind of a turning point, if you will, where I see a lot of great organizations, including those participating as part of the Blue Forest project, really pursuing some large scale work, including some of the first certified projects on the market right now. So yes, blue carbon is factored into the ecosystem services we consider, but we're also thinking about things like habitat, coastal protection, from hurricanes and flooding, thinking about nutrient cycling and kind of, reducing some of the land-based impacts that are degrading coastal ecosystems. So in looking at ecosystem valuation, we're really trying to factor in all those things, and not just myopically focusing on blue carbon, because I think we all acknowledge that these systems provide so many ecosystem services that aren't getting enough attention, perhaps, and certainly are not getting included in the price, right? And I think that's one of the key things that we need to move towards is building on blue carbon by talking about many of the other services that these coastal ecosystems provide for us.
Okay, and that leads into the next question I have, which is, can you suggest any indicator of success of mangrove resilience and their shoreline protection?
As in, are you talking about like physical factors, like their height, or
something to measure?
Well, I think it really depends on the hydrology of the area. Looking at coastal dynamics and wave exposure, for instance. I think healthy red mangroves, obviously right on the coastline, are really critical as kind of a first line of defense. One of the things that people are finding is that if mangroves have too many nutrients, essentially like from sargassum, for instance, they actually may be growing too quickly and not establishing a really strong root structure, which provides for some of that kind of coastal protection. And they make them less resilient to storm-related impacts like high winds, which can break more fragile trunk structures. So, I won't speak to this as a scientist, because I certainly am not, but I will say, some of the physical attributes associated with mangroves, like their height, the richness or fullness of their canopy, the anchoring by the root system, all of those factor into the ability for them to really protect, coastal communities. But I think there are more resources out there that can get to some of the specific indicators that, the question is asking for.
Great. And sort of the next sort of question was also on how to recognize or have indicators on, you mentioned something about local expert knowledge. I'm just wondering, how does that sort of factor in? How's the mechanisms of factoring in the local knowledge?
Well, these were not necessarily indicators we used in this scorecard per se. Now that's certainly, I think, a complementary approach where you're really looking at kind of the diversity inclusion of various stakeholders. For us, it was engaging with folks that we had kind of existing networks with, right? And many of these individuals are associated with research institutions or universities or even government agencies. But I think, if you're looking at a framework for doing that, I'm not sure one has really been developed. And what I would say too is it's not just about numbers, right? Just if you have an indicator, number of local indigenous people engaged or something like that. Yeah, those can speak to that process. But I think the authenticity of the process, the extent to which local stakeholders are really being heard and engaged, and not simply showing up at a workshop, I think that matters even more than numbers, right? So I think if you're looking for indicators around making sure local engagement takes place, I think you need to look very closely at that process itself, right? It's not a numbers kind of situation. It's more, what's the nature of that interaction? Who holds power in that relationship? I think all of those things are really important to look at when you're trying to have really kind of inclusive engagement.
Okay, and just one sort of comment is that when you've identified these sort of priorities for restoration, they're actually priorities in how countries feel about these ecosystems as well. So you could it's you're indicating not just restoration priorities but other ones as well. Just one last comment or one last question is, so what's the next steps for this? Where could you see this going?
Well, like I said, we're in the process of developing an easier, user-friendly kind of version of this scorecard. It just occurred to me, maybe I could even make this web-based, with kind of a calculator involved. So it's not just a PDF. Gosh, giving myself some challenges, even, now I'm on the record saying that, but yeah, I think that would be a really good kind of tool to be incorporated as part of the Blue Forest Toolkit in some capacity. We looked at the wider Caribbean region as part of this project, but if you looked at the scorecard, some of the questions we're asking, this can really be used anywhere. We were focusing, the report itself was focusing on the wider Caribbean region, but I think the scorecard itself is forgive me for saying, but evergreen and something that can be used anywhere globally, because it's really getting at the same issues that affect coastal ecosystems all around the world. So of course, I want to make this scorecard more widely available and easier to use, and something that we can really, distribute among our network and get more people using it, thinking about it, because this is a preliminary step. This is not going to tell you exactly how you do restoration work, but it's going to help inform that conversation and make sure you're considering all the different aspects involved in doing large scale restoration, which is very challenging. So there is the scorecard piece, but I think for us as an organization working with our partners, we really want to put some of this into practice, and we want to actually select sites and conduct large scale restoration, and not simply just prioritize it. So I think this project has given us a really good idea of what are some of the hotspots, right, in the Caribbean. Not to say the sites that scored lower are somehow not worthy of attention, but rather, if we have a limited set of resources and time and human capacity, what are the big, kind of the low-hanging fruit, if you will, to go next. So we're hoping to actually do some of this work and pursue large-scale habitat restoration with the goal of ultimately certifying these projects too.
Okay, thank you, and we definitely applaud the landscape approach. I think that's definitely where the future is headed here. So thank you very much, Ben, for your presentation today and all the other presenters earlier. And thank you to our audience for attending these past 2 days to learn about the project results of the Blue Forest project. Now, before we sort of break for the sort of networking session, I'd just like to share that beginning tomorrow on Thursday, the 17th of June, the Blue Forest project will also be hosting a month of Blue Forest webinar series. And tomorrow we'll be joined by Gabriel Grimsich of the United Nations Environment Programme, Dorothy Hera of IUCN, Joseph Kipore of the Kenya Marine Fisheries Research Institute, Angela Rubilia of the Abu Dhabi Global Data Initiative, and Dalila Sekira of World Wildlife Fund Mozambique for an in-depth discussion on multi-scalar Blue Forest policy approaches. On 24th of June, our second webinar will be on the theme of social justice and communities for Blue Forests. And on 1st of July, our third webinar will be discussing blue carbon science. And on the 8th of July, our Blue Forest webinar will feature a panel discussion about remote mapping and technology for blue forest conservation. And our final webinar on the 15th of July will be discussing blue forests and blue carbon horizons, and looking at how to potentially harness the value of oceanic blue carbon. And if you haven't registered for these series, the registration link will be available in the chat. It's been sent out to a lot of our sort of email groups. So now, please join us on the remote networking platform for further conversations on today's topics. I'll be there. The link is now posted in the chat, and you can also find it in your event emails. You don't need to install any application, as Remo will open directly in your internet browser. We hope to see you there. And once again, thank you all for joining us today. Ciao.